everybody. I am going to give you a walkthrough here of our test review assignment. And for the next 3 weeks, so weeks 3, 4, and 5, each week your assignment is to do a test review. This week it's on a cognitive abilities, achievement or intelligence test. Next week it'll be on a vocational test, and then in week 5 it will be on a personality test. So given that we're going to do these for 3 weeks in a row, it's worth making sure we understand what we're looking at here. So I'm going to walk through the assignment and walk through some of the key points, so hopefully it'll answer some of your questions. So the idea here is to provide a test review of a particular test that you're looking for. And I want to emphasize this is not a review of a particular research article. You may have done those for other classes where you pick one article and then talk about what they did in that article. That's not what this is. This is, when I say a test, I mean a measure, like the SAT is a test. The Stanford Achievement Test is a test. And you're going to use a lot of articles to be able to make sure that you've got all of the information about this particular test. Although, as we'll see in a minute, your job has just gotten easier, but I'll get to that in a second. So there are some particular things you want to cover here: general features, description of the test, psychometric properties, discussion of the items, issues and concerns, and summary. Now, let me emphasize what I think is the most important part here. The most important part in judging if this is a test you should use is C, these psychometric properties. And this is what I'm going to be putting the most weight on to see if you understand these concepts of reliability, validity, and standardization, because those are the most important parts of judging if this is a test you should use or not. So those are big pieces. I'm also going to post in the doc sharing space a sample outline for you. You don't have to use this, but certainly it might be to your advantage. And it just will give you some hints too. So there's a sample title page. Of course, you're going to do an abstract. One clue and hint, remember, an abstract isn't your introduction. It's a summary of your whole paper. So it shouldn't be either a cut and paste of your first paragraph, and it should not just be a talk of your first paragraph. You want to say everything that's in the paper in your abstract. Okay. So then in the body, you're going to do an introduction, that first paragraph. It could be 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's a good idea to start out talking about what is the thing you're going to measure. So, start out with, depression is, and use a definition from the DSM. Talk about how many people it affects. Whatever it is that you're interested in studying. Or if we're talking about achievement, you might start with some broad statements about understanding student achievement. Understanding student achievement is important today to ensure that students are learning what they're intended to learn in the schools. Some general statements about the thing that is being measured, and then lead into that discussion of, okay, so one way to measure that is with this particular test, whatever the test is that you've chosen, and include the title, the author, the publisher, the date published, purpose of the test, and who it's meant to be used for. So that would all be if you included all that, that would be a good introduction. Then you're going to go into a description of the test. All of these things, what are the kinds of behaviors that the test samples? So in this case, we're looking at math. Are there specific subscales to the test? What are the specific subtests? So you'll see that many of these tests have different subtests to them. So for instance, the Wechsler scales have between 12 and 16 different subtests that they measure. What are those subtests? How is it administered? Is it individual or group? Is it computer, paper, or pencil? Either way. How long does it take? How many, you may not be able to find how many items there are, but do you have any estimates? What format? Are they open-ended? Are they multiple choice? Or how does it work? Are items objectively scored, subjectively scored? What kinds of tests or scores are produced? All of that will be in your description. And then we're going to get into the psychometric properties. So I'm going to go through these when we look at a sample report in a minute and go through these in more detail with you. So we'll come back to this. Then issues and concerns. Are there ethical and legal concerns that you have? Do some groups seem to do better than others? Are there concerns about how the tests are being used, in society, about this particular kind of test is being used inappropriately, or any of those kind of things that might be concerns about this test. And then finally, your summary. And again, in your summary, you're summarizing the evidence about whether this is a test that should be used in practice. Are there certain groups or situations in which it should or should not be used? And I'll come back to this a little bit at the end, but this isn't a case where you talk about what you feel or what your opinion is. It's a summary of evidence. So there is evidence that this should be used, this is a valid and reliable test to be used, or there's, in most cases, there's some evidence that it is, and in some cases that evidence might be lacking. So you might want to use caution, particularly maybe with some particular groups that aren't represented in their sample, or those kind of things. So that's what you're going to be talking about more than kind of your personal opinion about things. It will be your opinion, but it's really based on the research evidence that you see. And similarly, in the front, you don't need to tell me why you think this is important, why you chose this test. Let's try to make this, as you many of you saw in my responses to the first week's discussions, I really want to push you in this class to step away from your personal experience and move toward research and what the research says. And while your personal experience is absolutely valid for you, I want you to understand that when we're talking about using these tests with lots of different people, we need to look at what the research says, because your personal experience just may not be representative of the rest of the population. And we want to know what works for people overall. So that's a really tough thing to learn how to do. And it's really hard to separate your own experience from things, but I really want you to try to do that. So try to go through this paper without referring to yourself. I think this, I think that, or using the third person, this student. This student is just another way to say I without saying I. So again, just try not to refer to yourself and use that, think of that as a challenge as well for this paper. But to get back to the assignment, your life just got a whole lot easier, and you didn't even know it. So the university, as you know, has many different databases in the library, and if you go down to library online databases, they'll come up. Well, they've just subscribed to a new one, and it's called the Mental Measurements Yearbook. And lucky for you, the Mental Measurements Yearbook gives reviews of thousands of tests. So if you click on that, it'll come up, and you can search for all of these tests in print that people have written reviews on. So on one hand, this makes your life a whole lot easier, because up till now, every class that went through here had to go through and find all of this information and research on their own, and here it is all brought together for you. On the other hand, it means I'm going to be stricter in making sure you understand what all of these mean, because I know you don't have to go searching for it all. So that means I'm going to be even more clear that you understand what it means and aren't just repeating it and reporting it back to me. So first step is to choose a test. I'm going to highly recommend that you choose a test that's in this database. There are lots of other tests out there, but pretty much any test that's commonly used in the field of psychology is going to be in here. Now, there's some tools that are used by lay people that sound like psychology tools that aren't in here, but you want to be thinking, and that's probably actually then not a tool that I should be thinking about using, because it's not probably sound. So try to use one of these. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. So if you're not sure, you don't know the names of any achievement tests, you can just type in achievement test and see what comes up. A whole bunch of things. The SRA, the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test, 3 R's test, wide range achievement test, wide range achievement test again, the Stanford achievement test, the Canadian achievement test, a different wide range achievement test. There's 5 pages here at least of achievement tests. If you're interested in intelligence tests, you can type in intelligence test and take a look at what's available here. Test of nonverbal intelligence, a Kaufman brief intelligence test. All right, so there's a whole lot of these. So there's a couple cautions that I would give you. try to find recent tests, and you can see just by the year here, this is the year that there are reviews for them. And the other key is make sure it's a current edition. So many tests, most tests, if they are widely used, are refreshed every 8 to 10 to maybe 12 years because they're all norm referenced, which means they compare to averages. And you don't want to be comparing someone's abilities now to people 25 years ago. You want the students now to be compared to other students now and figuring out what an average score is. So every 10 years or so, they're going to update all of those norms and usually revise the test. So you're going to want to make sure you have something recent and it's the most recent edition. One way to do that is just to look through here, and if you pick one and you see this, you can just search for that name and you'll see all the versions that come up. And just in case, it never hurts to actually just go to Google, find the publisher. So see, here's the Slauson Full Range from '88. Oh, here's the 2002 edition, and you can see the different editions here. But if you go to Google and just Google it, it'll probably be the first thing that comes up. And if you find, so here's its site, and you'll be able to check and just make sure you have the primary, the most current edition that you're using and interested in, because you don't want to review a test and then find out it's 2 editions old. All right, so when we looked at those achievement tests, and I'm going to give you a sample here and walk you through it. Achievement tests can be very wide-ranging. So a lot of those ones we saw there test all the subjects, well, the basic subjects that we're looking at diagnosis in. So reading, math, writing, sometimes listening, oral comprehension. And to write a review of that actually would probably take more than 4 or 5 pages. It would be pretty complex. So I'm going to suggest you can certainly do those though. You might want to limit it to a particular area. There's a particular test that I'm going to show you called the Key Math that just focuses on math, surprisingly enough. And again, you can see here, this was the original one. Here there was a revised version, and now we're on the 3rd version. And if you click on that version, you will get the review, and this is what I was talking about where a lot of this work is done for you. Here's the publishers, Pearson. Here's its purpose. Here's the population that it's meant for. Here are the different scores that are produced. Here's how long it takes to give. All of these things. Here's there's 2 forms of it. And we have, as we scroll down here now, we have a review that's written of it all through here. And what this review gives you is, first of all, a description of the test and what it is, its revised update, how it's administered and scored, so all stuff, how it was developed. Great. All right, now here's a technical piece that we get into that's going to fit into these pieces that I said I'd come back to. So let's first talk about the standardization sample. So this is a little different. This is not like when you read a research article and there's a sample. This is the standardization sample is used to set the norms. So when you talk about finding out what is average, they determine what average is by using a standardization sample. So you can imagine if I was using a standardization sample and I only tested people at one university and I used them to figure out what is average. Well, if you lived across the country or you were a different ethnic or racial group or you weren't in a university, you might not want to have that as your comparison group. So what you're looking for in a standardization sample is testing a whole bunch of people, and you want them to make sure it was representative in terms of some certain characteristics. So what kind of the gold standard is if they say they matched to the most recent census, for example. And if they match on things like gender, race, ethnicity, education level, all of these things, if they do that, that means the percentages in the sample are equal to the percentages in the population, which indicates then that the standardization sample is going to be like the general population. So a lot of times, though, you'll find sometimes maybe one racial or ethnic group wasn't used in the standardization sample. Like you might find Asians or Native Americans, for instance, aren't included. Well, in that case, if this might be a great test for everybody else, but if my client is Asian and they're not represented in the standardization sample, I might think twice about using that test. So I want to know about that standardization sample. How big is it? How representative is it? And so you can read through here. This standardization sample was on 3,630 individuals, so that's big, that's good. 4 years, 6 months to 21 years. Oh, and they did half in the spring and half in the fall. And with achievement tests, that can be important because your age is important, but if you're in the fall, you have a much different level of knowledge in that grade than you do in the spring. So splitting it into two makes sense there. Was recruited to represent ethnic, mother's education level, geographic region, and special education distributions in the United States. All right, so that's as a general statement is good. We might later want to go and see if we can find out any more detail about that. We might not be able to because we don't have the test manual, but we can at least look at the publisher's site and see if we can find out specifically which ethnic groups they looked at in any of those pieces. So again, it says there's tables in the manual with all that, which of course we don't have. But so that's what you're looking at in the standardization sample. Am I comfortable having this group of people determine what normal is for my grades? All right, so next we want to look at reliability. So if you don't remember what reliability is, you might look at the week 2 instructor guidance. I go through what each of these things are. So there's 3 kinds of ways to look at reliability, and I want you to comment on all 3 of them. Now, your comment might be that there's no evidence or that we don't need it, but at least make the comment to show me you understand what that means. So inter-rater reliability is all about whether 2 people would grade this the same way. Now, it does not mean that, for instance, if you were rating me, that I would rate my own characteristics the same way you would rate my characteristics. It's like when it's like when you give an essay test and 2 different people score that essay. I might give that 3 out of 5 and you might give it 2 out of 5. Neither of us wrote the essay, we're the graders, the scorers. So if you have a whole multiple choice test, we don't really need inter-rater reliability because it's so obvious you either grade it right or wrong. So often in those cases, inter-rater reliability won't be reported, and that's fine. We don't need to criticize it for not doing it. If, however, you're reviewing a test and there are open-ended responses that need to be scored, we want to know what the inter-rater reliability is. For example, many intelligence tests, like the Wechsler scales, have vocabulary items where they'll say, like, what is a dog? And the examinee has to define what a dog is. That's just an example, I'm making it up. And so say the person says it's a furry animal that has 4 legs and a tail and says woof. Okay, is that a 0-point response, a 1-point response, or a 2-point response? Well, the manual gives you specific guidelines for how to score it. But the question is, do 2 different people see that response the same way? And so that's what we look at for inter-rater reliability, is we're going to look at the correlation between 2 different raters who score the exam. And it's not just 2, but they do this over multiple people and multiple answers. And so you get a correlation number. So that's what you're going to be looking for. And correlations, as you may remember, and I think I covered this a little bit in some of my instructor guidance, go from -1 to 1. 0 means there's no relationship. It means sometimes one scorer gives it high and the other gives it low, and sometimes one gives it low and the other gives it low, and it's just totally no relationship between the 2. Negative would mean that it would be really bad, which means that consistently when one gives high, the other is low. What you're looking for is a positive correlation that's probably over 0.8. That means that usually the graders agree on the scores, which really is implying that the instructions for scoring are good. All right, so that's inter-rater reliability. So you might say, this is an objectively scored test. There's no need for inter-rater reliability. You might say, there is a need for inter-rater reliability and I couldn't find any evidence. Or you might say, there's a need for inter-rater reliability and here's what it was. That's what you might do. All right, so let's quickly go through these others. Test retest is the idea that your score stays stable. Now, obviously with achievement tests, we expect you to learn over time. But what this is interested in, so with achievement tests, we're going to have fairly short time frames between those two administrations because it's not measuring whether you learn over time. It's measuring if you still have the same knowledge, does this test give you the same result? It's like with personality tests. Theoretically, that's a stable thing. Your test should be the same from time to time. So we are not looking for this to change. We're looking for this number to stay the same and tell us this person, if we have someone who has the same knowledge, it will always give us the same score. All right, so again, this is a correlation of a test administered at time 1 with a test administered at time 2. Of the same person takes the test. Do they get the same score? If they got exactly the same score, you'd have a correlation of 1. If they got a completely opposite score, they got 100 the first time and a 0 the next, people who got high scores first got low scores second, that would be a negative correlation. And 0 would be no relationship. Some people who had high scores first had low scores. Some people who had high scores had high scores, no relationship. But again, you're looking for scores about 0.8 or over, saying if you take it once and then take it again with nothing else changing in between, you should get the same score. So that's test retest. Internal consistency is, again, the idea that within this particular one administration that you took, you want to make sure that the test items that measure the same thing agree with each other. So for instance, all the items that measure addition, if you do good on some of them, you should do good on the other ones of those. There's a couple of different ways to measure internal consistency. One is a number that's a calculation called alpha. So if you see numbers that are alpha, you'll be wanting to report that under internal consistency. And again, that's like a correlation. You're looking for high numbers over 0.8. The perfect would be 1.0. Another way to do it is to split the test in half and correlate the two halves with each other, and that's called split half reliability, and that is another way to measure internal consistency. So you've basically just said, does this half of the test correlate highly with this other half of the test? And that's fine too. A third thing that people do is alternate form, and actually this key math has that. There are two different forms that are supposed to be equal, and they correlate the difference between those two forms. And tell you what the correlation is between the forms as another way of measuring internal consistency. So you're going to report results of each of those there. And they should be in your own words because I want you to describe and tell me what the numbers mean. So yes, this reviewer has told you the coefficients. Let's see, find test retest reliability. Here's their alternate form. Test retest reliability was assessed. Not sure about the ages. Ranged from 0.86 to 0.88. I want you to tell me, she's not going to define test retest reliability because she assumes her audience knows. I want you to tell me what that is. So 0.86 to 0.88 means that when the students were given it at one time and then took it again, the correlation between those two ranged from 0.86 to 0.88. And as she says, this demonstrates high stability over time. So I want you, again, don't just quote her. Tell me what that means and tell me whether it's good or not. Okay? And then validity. So on week 3 instructor guidance, go through each of these different types of validity. And it's never going to be the case, probably, that a single test would have looked at all of these different kinds. But for content validity, you're looking at things like, did they have experts agree that yes? So remember, validity in general is, does this test measure what we think it does? So one way to figure that out is to ask experts. Do you think this test looks like these items really measure what you think it does? Does it measure math ability? Math achievement? And so if you look in the review, it does talk about, up in the development, having something like 400 experts go through and talk about and review it. So that would be something that you would put in the validity section. Here it is, over 400 educators. All right. A factor analysis is a way at looking at content validity. Factor analysis takes, again, all of the items and sees how they group together. So if I say this subtest, all of these items measure this one kind of math, or on intelligence tests, we'll often see all of these items measure verbal ability. We want to run a factor analysis to see if it's true that all of those items do in fact group together. And they're all more similar to each other than they are to other items on the test. So if there are subscales, you should be looking for factor analysis. So if your test doesn't just report one overall score, if it reports an overall score plus some subscores, you should see if there's some factor analysis evidence. Analysis of subgroups. So this could be, do different genders perform differently? Do different races and ethnicities perform differently? Do different age groups perform differently? So on achievement tests, we should see improvement of scores as years go by. That would be analysis of subgroups, and that in fact is one of the things they did. If you look through here, they did younger ages begin to plateau in high school, etc. So they are looking at subgroups, and you would explain that research here, and again, tell me what it means. External validity, you'll see a lot. So this is comparing scores on this test to something else. The most common thing to do is to compare scores on this test to scores on another test that should measure the same thing. So I have a different test that I already think measures math. If my test scores correlate highly with that, then I can say my test probably measures math too. So that's one kind of external validity. But another kind to look for, particularly on things like an SAT or a GRE, those are supposed to predict your performance in college or in graduate school. So you want to see it compared not just to other tests of aptitude, you want to see the relationship between that and someone's GPA. How well does it explain it? So that's going to be your external validity, not just other tests, but other measures of things that it's supposed to predict. In week 4, when we start talking about tests that are supposed to predict how well you do at work, does anyone ever actually do the study to see if that test actually does predict how well people do in that job? Or if it's supposed to predict your interest and how well you'll do in a future career? Do they really measure whether it does? That's external validity. And then substantive validity is probably the least common one that people do. But particularly in achievement tests, we want to know if students are really using the skills that the math skills, for instance, if we're doing a test of math, to answer the questions. Or is it perhaps the case that these tests are giving away clues? So you may have taken a test before where the answer to one question kind of gives away the answer to another. Well, in that case, you didn't use your achievement knowledge to answer that question. You used hints from other questions. So one way to get at that is to have people do something called a think aloud, where you give them the test and they say aloud what they're thinking as they answer it. But and so you kind of have their cognitive problem-solving process of what they're doing and how they solve that. So again, it's not common to do that, but you can check and see if they did, or write and say that there wasn't any evidence of that. All right. Final issue is issues and concerns, and I think I covered that. So you can get a whole lot of this information, as I said, from these existing test reviews in the Mental Measurements Yearbook. So that's great. But please, a couple other comments. Citing this. This is, when we look at the end of this review, let me see. Oh, there are in fact actually 2 reviews here, which you'll see. There's a second here by Suzanne Lane. But these are actually, as you'll see, so this is the title of it, and you can cite it. So you would cite it Graham, and let me see if there's a review for cross-reference. I'll have to get back to you on how to cite these particular tests. Let me see if clicking on that gives us anything. Nope, other reviews she did, which is interesting. All right, so let's leave that for a second. But so I don't want you to stop. What I was saying is I don't want you to just look at this. At least look at the publisher's website. So, okay, we'll search for the key math. Just use Google and see what comes up. Key math 3, and let's see what we get. All right, it's Pearson. There's its, you can see I already came here to check it out. So here's its site. Let's see what we get. Just cruise around. There's a little webinar there. You can, if you click on the frequently asked questions, just read through them, see what other people have to say about it. For instance, why does administration time take so long? And here's some more information about how long it takes that you might want to include. Samples of assessment items. You can see some of the sample items that are on the test, for instance. So look at the publisher's website. And you're also going to, let me say that with some care. I don't want you to say, lead off with, this is a great, reliable test. It's the most common test of math given ever. Citation, publisher's website. Be careful. When you're talking about reliability and validity in particular, I don't just want you to say, this is a highly reliable test and cite the publisher's website because the publisher said it was reliable. I want you to look at the numbers, look for research, look at those independent reviews, and see what they say and judge the numbers yourself. Don't quote the publisher saying it's a great test. Of course they think it's a great test. You want other people's evidence of that, okay? Be skeptical. Come at this whole assignment with kind of a skeptical attitude of, show me why you think it's good. Show me the evidence for that. That's a good mindset to have walking into this. Be skeptical. All right, so here's more information about those norms. It doesn't appear that they're giving a lot of other information about them. So you can scroll through. You can also, if you have a particular area that you couldn't find information on before, you can just try to Google that specific thing. So I'm looking for the Key Math 3 standardization because I want to see if there's anything else that might come there. And you can just see kind of what comes up. What else is included in, what do other people have to say about it? At least look through a page or two of these results. And then finally, I would say do try the other EBSCO databases. So if you just do the psych articles or psych info, you can usually do both of those at one time. And I come back here and pick psych articles. I'm not sure if this is the same interface you guys have as students or not, but hopefully it is. And you can just cite and try to look at what's been published in other academic journals about the key math. So this is a review that was in the Journal of Psychoeducational Assessment. Here's a study that's about using it in Andalusia. Now it looks like it's written in Spanish, but you might be able to at least test read the abstract and make note that there is a Spanish version, for example. Here's one where they use it to compare it to a cognitive levels test, so that would be another kind of validity that you might mention. Here's one where a different version of it is compared to the wide range achievement test. So this was published in 1976, kind of a long time ago. So be careful, look at publication dates, look at versions, but you might mention that a past version has been compared to that. Similarly, that one's 1975. Here's concurrent validity of the Peabody test with the key math. Again, older version, but you might, again, have maybe one or two sentences that says other independent reviewers have made these correlations. So take a look again, as I said. So 3 sources. Start with the mental measurements yearbook. You're going to get a whole lot there. Do a Google search. Look at the publisher's sites and at least the first couple pages of results to see what people are saying. Third, look at the psych articles and psych info databases for what else is published under that name. So you should not have just one reference for this paper. There'll be multiple. Focus again on standardization, reliability, and validity as the most important pieces, and make sure I'm going to be grading to on whether I think you understand it. So make sure you're providing me enough information that I can make that judgment that you really understand these. If you don't understand it, the thing to do is ask me questions before you turn it in. So I am here and glad to answer questions about any of this. Again, please email, ask your instructor, whatever way works best for you, and I'll be glad to get back to you and help you through it. If you want to send me the name of the test that you're interested in reviewing, just to check that that one makes sense, I'll be glad to do that as well. So I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to reading your papers.